I'm Pfetch. I am the head of the Marriott Content Studio, and I am sitting down here today after you've just watched 1,000 cast. I'm sitting down with Yeti, the Yeti team here. If we could do a quick round robin, maybe I'll throw Travis first to you. We'll just go with what's in the center of my screen, and we'll just quickly introduce who you are and kind of your relation to this film.
My name is Travis Rummel. I'm the co-director and producer for 1,000 Casts of a small production company called Films Media with Ben Knight. And we were super honored to bring Oliver's story to the big screen, and just really appreciate Yeti kind of getting us connected. It was a long journey, both physically and mentally, to kind of get it here to share. And it's really nice to have it out in the wild.
Great. I'll go. Taylor Johns, Director of Content Production over here. Yeah, and Scott's kind of partner in crime in the Yeti Presents world.
Go on, Scott.
Scott Ballew here, oversee all the Yeti Presents and films at Yeti.
And I'm Paulie Dery. I look after marketing here at Yeti, and I think my job is to make sure we keep making these wonderful films and keep them as pure as possible.
Well, speaking of which, Paulie, I think this first question, I want to really dig into the strategy. I know a lot of our audience wants to talk about what's it like shooting in Bhutan, like what's the craziest thing that happened while we were filming, but let's get there in a little bit. I want to start with strategy. So maybe, Paulie, you can take this one. I wanted to start with the why. So could you share with the audience like a quick primer on Yeti's storytelling strategy, basically? Like, what are you guys doing in this space? Why are you doing it?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks for having us. Look, I think it's super simple. Storytelling was always how Yeti did marketing from day one, when we were just the two brothers trying to sell coolers. We've always embraced the communities of which our products live. And what we discovered is there's great stories to be told about these groups of people and places, and we just started making these films that people loved and we love to tell. And it's really not much more complex than that. We obviously have a great fan base who hang out for us to make these films every year, it's not like they're tied to an ROI or some form of profit making. I wish they were, but I'm also proud they're not. I'm just proud that we keep it as pure as possible to tell these fabulous and beautiful stories of the places that, yes, our products live, which is cool. And if that's what you take out of it, that, oh, this is the Yeti universe, then great. But they're not meant to push product. There's barely any product in them. So it's really a representation of the world that we love to be in, and the people that make that up. And that's the strategy. We've talked at length about what length should these things be? Do we need to adapt to like more social platforms? People don't have the focus anymore. We've never found that a problem. If you make a great story and you tell it beautifully, like Travis did and Scott always does, and Taylor makes sure we do, people watch. So it doesn't matter where you put them. Tell a great story, people watch. And so that's where our strategy is pretty light and pretty simple. Find a great story, tell a great story, put it out for people to watch. So we try and keep it as clean as possible.
I have to say, it's probably the quickest 28 minutes that I've watched in a while. As I was watching this film with all the other selections for brand storytelling, I saw 28 minutes and I was like, ooh, is that a short film or not? But it's a really easy watch, and I've watched it multiple times since. And that's a credit to the way that the story, we'll get there in a little bit when we talk about creative and story, but just it's jam packed with story at every twist and turn. And speaking, Paulie, I know you mentioned, the ROI there. Maybe this is a question I'll throw to Taylor. How do you measure success at Yeti? If you're not measuring it necessarily by number of coolers sold or product moved, What's the internal team's measure of success for this type of work?
Oh, I think the internal team's measure of success is that, I mean, we have a community that we need to report back to that is very important to Yeti. And as long as we're telling stories that really resound within that large community of Yeti, that's number one. And then I think what is the most rewarding is, at least personally for me, is seeing them being screened at events like this. And then also we do a little film tour where you're able to watch these films with a group of folks that aren't as close to them, or it's not as, insular to everyone there, and just getting their reaction and their like personal feedback, So I think to me, it's the community love and feedback and, and all of that we get to hear back from all these films, that we kind of go for and make sure we're doing right by the community we're surrounded by.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Taylor. The first time I went to the film tour was snowing in Denver, snowing a lot. And there was 2,000 people lined up waiting to get their tickets. And
Wow.
That's the ROI I think that is all we care about. Did we enjoy the film? I think it's probably a key one. Did we like it? And as Taylor said, does our community, love it? That's the start.
It's a good way to look at it. This one can go to maybe Taylor, Paulie, or Scott, but could you share some of the inside the house? I think you have a rapt audience here who is either well on their way of making films, or they are aspirationally toe dipping in this space. What is the biggest challenge you face when creating content at Yeti? It seems like you guys have a pretty, wide leash or long rein on kind of what you have to do, but what do you find challenging internally at the company when making content like this?
It's a good one for Scott. Scott, I don't know, what challenges do you see when you make these beautiful films?
I think the biggest challenge for us at the moment is to not repeat ourselves and to keep trying to find new stories and new people. I think, we're obviously not the only ones doing this, and we weren't the first. And the short, character-driven, aspirational film are a dime a dozen now. So I think the challenge from my perspective is to keep them interesting for us and new characters, new geographies, new pursuits, new stories, new demographics, new music, new everything, where, after you do 85 of these, it's hard to not feel repetitive. So I think the challenge for us is to keep pushing the envelope, because I think the benefit we had at the beginning is that we didn't have a roadmap to try to follow or beat. So we were just doing what was instinctive. And I think by default, that kind of put us out in front, and at least in volume, of what we were doing. So I think now, 7 or 8 years into it, the challenge for me is just to keep pushing the envelope, storytelling wise, cinematography wise, character wise, format wise, all those things, because we've never had a pushback from the top down and doing them. So I don't think we're listening to, folks like Travis or musicians who work for multiple brands. I feel very fortunate that the pushbacks and the challenges aren't a organizational one. And yeah, I think it's kind of just the only challenges we have, we enforce upon ourselves to keep making them better.
Yeah, and I think they don't all work, right?
How do you know when something's not working? Like how does that come up? Is it?
I don't know. I think that's Taylor and Scott. They have the best instinct in the bears of critiquing their own work. But I think that's to Scott's point. Scott and Taylor keep pushing these things, and 8 times out of 10 that works, and 2 don't. But that's a
Pretty good batting average.
It is. It's also just the risk you have to take to make sure that you can keep making him good. Otherwise, Scott's spot on. They're just repetitive.
Well, to get to the film in specific, you guys both you created a great segue to the creative and the story part of the conversation I wanted to have. Where did this idea come from? Like, he is so enigmatic. There's so many things that resonated with me personally watching this. Fishing in general, I may not look at right now, but I'm not an avid fisherwoman person, but I grew up fishing with my grandpa and my dad. I still do some light tackle work sometimes. So there's this whole element that it's not just about fishing, but there's a story. I think every good fisher person knows that it's a metaphor for life, right? Like when you go out and you're catch and release, like there's something that's really meditative, there's something really personal. But I was just, as a fellow storyteller, I am in awe of the work you do and the stories that you find, and Oliver is just such an individual story. So I have to know, share all the secrets. Where did you find him? How did that story come about?
Well, maybe this is one for Travis. Go, Scott.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean,
Well, Scott called me and said, "Do you want to go fish with the king of Bhutan?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds interesting."
Easy answer. Yeah.
But I think, like the well is deep at Yeti, and it's authentic, and these are real people and real stories, and they have this incredible lineup of ambassadors, and they've been able to kind of like work through and like find out these people's backstory. And Oliver's just happened to have a lot of chapters that were like incredibly interesting and not necessarily clear how they connected one to the other. And I think for us as storytellers, like it's always about character. And it was like a gift to be handed this and say like, oh yeah, maybe we will meet the king of Bhutan, but we'll go to Manhattan, we'll go to the Bahamas. And like to have the resources to like do the story justice and the time is like such an anomaly. And I think that's one of like the great joys of being able to work with Yeti is actually for them to understand that it's not just like go for 3 days and like get the shoot done and then make an edit and that's it. And like it stands out because we spent so much time and effort and went to these places and had these experiences with Oliver. And we were able to bring his story to life through that.
What guided
Oliver had been he had been on the slate for a while to try to figure out, and I had known him for a while, and as you saw in the film, it was a thing where like we don't know, like you could just do a film on Wall Street, you could just do a film on kidnapping, and I don't think the avenue of how to approach the story in a short format, it wasn't clear, and just kept staying in touch with Oliver. And it was kind of until the trip to Bhutan arose that I was like, aha, maybe this is like an overarching, kind of secondary way to retroactively tell all of it under the banner of one trip. So yeah, it was one that was definitely discussed with him in person. Every time you hang out with him or go fishing and you hear a new story, and it was kind of overwhelming for a few years. Like, you kind of think about short films, you kind of have to be pretty specific with what the art is.
Well, Scott, tell me a little bit about that. I mean, there's so much, like you said, you guys had been in contact with him for a few years and more things kept coming out. I mean, this film could be 5 separate films. There's so much here. He's got, you could do a story on each one of those sub stories. What guided your thinking as far as like, all right, now we're at the point where I have something that I can pull it all together? Like how did you sort of know you had the story at that point?
Well, going back to the batting average, you don't know until you know. And that's just at the very end of the process. A lot could have gone wrong and a lot did go wrong in Bhutan. I think that the thing for me is like he had a kid around the same time as this trip happened. I was like, okay, that's a structure that I can wrap my head around, and that's universal, and it's not specific to fishing, and it's not specific to banking, and that's like, all right, that opened it up to me of maybe a more universal way to think of the story. And yeah, I think those two things kind of clicked around the same time. And there's also, a big part of what we do is just gaining the trust of these people. Like there's plenty of people that had reached out to Oliver to, get him on board to tell the story, and they kind of have to be ready and at a point in their life when they're willing to tell it and feel like it's, you know, complete enough to do a little snapshot of that point in their life. So it's kind of a two-way street. You know, we pick up the phone a lot of times and find a amazing story that might be a little premature to tell, or they're not in the right headspace to tell it. So I think it just kind of all clicked at the same time. And after calling 100 and, you know, other filmmakers, we finally landed on Felt Soul.
Thanks, Scott.
They're our first call always. That's the other part of it, is like, we don't, having the right partners and Ben directing and produce, or Travis directing and producing and Ben editing, is like, you know, there's like a comfort and a trust built into these relationships and
Absolutely.
collaborations that we have with, at this point, a pretty small group of people, that we know whether it's fully built out or not. Like if there's a understood thread that we're both on board and they go, we have a certain amount of confidence of how it will turn out based on who's out there making it.
And I don't think you can kind of like underestimate that point. Like just having a trusting relationship with all parties, whether it's Oliver as the ambassador, us as the production company, or Yeti as the sponsor and kind of brainchild, like that goes such a long way for everybody, because like everyone can go out and kind of feel like they're have the freedom and the responsibility that comes with that trust. And like that's what makes good art. It's not with like 6 people talking about, you know, like, is this going to sell more colors? Like, I don't know. Like, it's not like, that's thankfully not the point of this portion of like Yeti's marketing dollars. And there's so much value in that for an audience, I think.
Well, my question that I was going to get to is what guides story development at Yeti? And you guys have answered it pretty clearly for me, is it's story and character first, which is the best place to be. I was gonna ask Taylor, what makes this film, like, why is it a story? I understand that it's a story that needed to be told, but why is this a Yeti film? You know, like what makes it connected to what you're trying to do in content?
Oh, man. I feel like I'll do my best to answer this, but I feel like this is Scott's bread and butter to answer this one. I don't know. I mean,
answer, just trying to.
I think you've asked the question that is always hard for anybody at Yeti to verbalize, like what makes the Yeti brand Yeti and what makes the Yeti film Yeti, which is why it's just so ingrained that it's hard for me to get out. But I mean, I think it's pretty simple. I mean, it's the quality of storytelling and our production partner and the character we're talking about. You know, I think it's everything we've alluded to before that makes it a Yeti film. I don't think a lot of brands are able to make films the way that we have laid out just a few minutes ago, with a great production partner, a lot of trust in them, with Scott leading the charge and all of that. So, but I don't know, I'll hand it off to Scott to specifically like kind of what makes it a Yeti film and see if he can verbalize it better than I can.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been verbalized. I think it might be damaged if it ever was verbalized. I mean, there's never been a brief, there's never been a deck. It's been like a total internal kind of gut check sort of situation that we have our own parameters. And if, you know, I think if we're moved by something, we've developed this system that, you know, we know if something has the potential to hit all of these kind of arbitrary internal marks of, you know, of storytelling. And I don't think there's nothing really makes it Yeti that can be explained.
I think I think it is a tricky one. You know, I think for me, what I love about the films that these guys make, they're not meant to change your mind or persuade you into something. They're just meant to open your mind to a little snapshot into a world you mightn't be super familiar with. Scott and Taylor just, you know, told this crazy story of a tornado chaser recently, and I'm not going to chase tornadoes, but for 15 wonderful minutes I am in this world, and it's a fascinating look, and And I think that's what Travis and the team did with Oliver. He's the world's greatest fly fisherman. What does that world look like for just 28 minutes? Doesn't mean I'm going to go to Bhutan, but it's opened my mind. And I think a lot of the territory Yeti covers isn't traditional spaces. And I think the real trick to a great Yeti film is giving me this wonderful look at what a world I'm not familiar with looks like. And I think that's the real talent behind it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask this one to Travis as part of the production company. What would you have done differently on this one?
I mean, like, we make documentaries, so we kind of like go into it like with research and like some idea of who this person is and where we're going and why. But like, so much of the magic happens like in reality, and you have to react to it. And a lot of this was reacting to it. And Bhutan was like this black box, and like we had no idea kind of who our local production partner was and what the actual relationship was with access, and if there were actually any fish, and what it means to drive for 18 hours straight to go to a river, float it for 5 days.
I learned from the film it takes 6 days to get in. So
yeah, like
that's a pretty big production risk, if you're driving 18 hours and 6 days in and you're not sure what you're gonna get on the other end of it.
Yeah, no, we did all that, and then we didn't catch a fish for like 5 days, and like you're trying to be ready the entire time, and it's like truly torture. It's like the only thing worse than not catching fish is filming somebody not catching fish.
Right. Very compelling.
But like the nice thing is like we don't need a lot. Like we just needed like one good one, and Oliver like worked his ass off the entire time, never gave up, and like made it happen. So I think it's just like the amount of perseverance and dedication that like you have to commit to a project like this for it to succeed. It's hard to like, you're pretty naive going into it. And like every time it's never going to be easy, and you're never going to have all the answers, and you have to just kind of sign up and commit.
Okay, but I'm going to press you for an answer. What would you have done differently? You can't be a fortune teller, so you wouldn't have been able to know it was 5 days to catch a fish. But is there something, if you had to make this again?
I would have asked for money for a helicopter so we could have flown to the river and back. That would be like the number one thing. That was like 4 days of our lives of just in these like heinous mountain roads, like just barely hanging on.
Part of the experience, right?
I think knowing what you guys knew, I'm not sure you guys would make it if you knew what you knew.
I approved a helicopter, but Taylor shut it down.
Voice of reason. All right, I'm going to pivot a little bit into distribution. So Paulie, you got into this in the beginning, but why is doc format sort of the way? I think you talked about real people, real stories, and Scott, this might be kind of your purview as well, but why has documentary been so successful for you? Like, why did you make this film in a doc style format? Why not another take on it?
Yeah, I think, and Scott can jump in, but from a brand perspective, you hear every day brands trying to be authentic and true and pure. And yes, they should be, but it's different at Yeti because it's been nothing but, right? It's from day one. We're not good at gimmicks. We're not good at selling. We're great at loving the things we do, which is the pursuits, fishing, backcountry skiing, or surfing. We love it, and we love our products, and because they let us do that stuff. And so there's an element of staying true to that. And I think when you live in that world, you have an obligation to tell a very truthful story, and that is documentary of that. That's my take on it. Taylor and Scott probably got different takes, but Taylor touched on this at the start. We do have communities out there that we have a high bar, and we want to represent them well. Telling their story in the most truthful, beautiful, authentic way is how we live up to that bar. I think if we did anything else, I don't think we've ever hired an actor even for a TV ad. What are you claiming to be an actor now, Scott? Is
No,
this
I
something?
mean,
Is this
I
something
get
you-
Duma SAG letters every week.
Oh yeah, Scott's the gentleman who lives in the back in Scott's garage. We sometimes use because he's a good character or something. But
Right here.
and I think it helps with Scott's rent, so we feel good with that. But yeah, I mean that's our obligation to our communities, tell the truthful story, you know, and that's why we get to docs. But I don't know, Scott, why don't we do animated shorts, scripted shorts?
Yeah. Tell me what other platforms, not that what you won't do, but you know, this goes into the question of, you know, are there other platforms that you would experiment with? You know, is there something you'd consider toe
Yeah.
dipping into?
I would
I think-
love to do an animated short.
Don't give
Only
him
animated
ideas.
feature.
Now we're giving Scott ideas here, Kate. This is dangerous.
This is a good thing. This is a good thing. Well,
Taylor
here-
is like, you guys need to limit. Let's keep Scott in a box.
It's being recorded so we can all agree.
Not
Yeah,
trying to
know,
get anyone in trouble.
no,
I mean,
as we-
Yeti's made some amazing mockumentaries as well. I think that's a genre that they've explored with success and should be potentially revisited.
I think the truth is that, you know, I think maybe this all started kind of, you know, Yeti was at a major transformation and the founders were still the CEOs. They were the ones that hired me and they still operated in this real, you know, entrepreneurial way of like, they did things that they wanted to see, you know, without much more thought than that. And I think this came out of time. Travis was a part of the very first one. And I think it was, you know, two things, like how much can you tell about someone in 60 seconds? And you can't afford a feature. So that kind of leaves there's it's kind of like, all right, well, we
Yeah.
have cameras and we can make a 7-minute film that tells the stories about people that we're really interested in. And I don't think there's probably no decks, no chalkboards with what this was going to be or what it was at the beginning. I think it was simply like, well, we don't see a lot of these. Let's make these and let's make them good. And it's really never been questioned since, or thought too hard about. So I think it's like, what's the most feasible way to tell someone's story in a compelling way? And I think a short form documentary based on the world and the crews and everything that we had access to, made the most sense. And, I think broke through some of the noise of just some of the shorter form, viral stuff, 15, 30 second, 60-second stuff. And I think people appreciated that.
There's a time and a place for that, right? When you're really trying to go deep into someone's story, you have to create a reason for an audience to care and to stick around, right? So you can't always do that in a 15-second clip. There are ways to do it. But speaking of your audience, unfortunately, I watched this film on my, 13-inch laptop. I did put it into my larger desktop monitor. But as I was watching this, and I'll call out, there were some things that I just watched, your on-screen graphics. I probably wouldn't enjoy this film as much or wouldn't be able to read those as well on a mobile device. So I was thinking this whole time, man, I really wish I was in a theater right now watching this. But I'd love to hear your perspective. Anyone can answer this question. Just where would you love an ideal audience member to see? Like, how would you love someone to experience this film? I guess, what platform would you ideally want them to experience it on? And all of them is not an answer. I want you to pick one.
The theater, a huge screen theater with, hundreds of other people sitting next to them.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Scott and Taylor always say that though. You do, like, these films are meant to be watched as a community. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment. We had 2 years of COVID where the film tour couldn't roll.
Mm-hmm.
And we put them online and people love them, but there's a different energy in a room with hundreds
Absolutely.
of people watching that. Sorry, Taylor, don't interrupt.
No, I was totally agreeing. And because it is, that's been the most, I don't know, enjoyable place for me to watch them is in a theater surrounded by a bunch of folks. But, for those folks that can't make the film tour, with a big screen TV on a nice streaming service would be great eventually too down the road. But I think first and foremost is, theater.
With a really good sound bar or sound system. One of the things I was on a rewatch recently this past weekend, I was like, the music is fantastic in this. I just wanted to give you guys some props for that. I know you guys have good music in all of your films, but I think on third watch, I was more from an audio standpoint, just kind of carried through the story. Like it's very elegantly done, and I could walk away. Like the visuals are so compelling, but after watching it a few times, I walked away and I knew exactly where we were in the story by how the music, where we were with the music, what type of music, especially that last swell at the end when we're catching the fish, really got me in the feels. So here's a question, just asking kind of for the larger audience, not specific to Yeti, but what do you think the opportunities for brand funded films are? Like, where can this genre go? Like, where can the folks in this audience, people like myself at studios, what is kind of the great new frontier for all of us in brand funded films?
Scripted animation.
Well, that's what you're going to do next, Scott. So
Yeah.
we'll
with the guy who lives in Scott's garage, mandatory.
Expensive.
I don't know. I don't know, Travis. You're probably closer to what's going on in the world of platforms and so on.
Travis,
I'm only 2 cents. My two cents, I guess, of advice would be it's got to come from a pure place. I think if you head into this hoping to sell more cars, fill more hotel rooms and stuff, it's probably not going to roll that way for you.
Just for my leadership, I did not nod at that. Not a hospitality company.
No, but you might make the people who do stay at your hotels appreciate it more.
Yeah.
And maybe they will pass that on for sure, and feel something for what you're about as a brand, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a couple of ways brands approach this. They attach their name to something and try and get the association, or they create it and put something that they feel is meaningful out into the world. It's the latter we like. And if someone is at home and goes, wow, I love that film, and I love then what these people are about, then maybe eventually there comes into some form of commerce. But we'll take brand love every day, but we'll also take just a bigger community, a more educated community on the things we love. The more people that enjoy the wild for Yeti and can embrace the wild, or that can get out to it, is great for us. That's what we're about.
Yeah.
If that's telling beautiful 28-minute Travis Rummel stories, then I hope that's the case, and I hope we get to do that all day long.
We do have the 28-minute Travis Rummel story.
Well, that's the animated short that's coming out, right? Speaking of which, I think, Taylor, you mentioned the film tour. So what's next for 1,000 Casts? And I'm sorry, guys, I'm on East Coast. I'm totally losing my light right now. So sorry.
No. That's a great question. We're trying to figure out some broader distribution plans for our whole catalog of 85 or so films, and figuring all that out and prioritizing that and seeing if we can nail something down. But antsy to get it out there. I know a lot of folks are eager for us to get it out there, but just, trying to figure out a plan to get some good quality eyeballs on it when you can't go nationwide into theater.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a pretty big question though, right? And it's something Taylor and I tackle a lot. What the role of distribution on the platforms, like we're attached to a brand, right? Our films are attached to brands, and I think platforms get a little nervous of that. They're like, well, that's branded content. I'm like, it's not. It's just we're funding great storytellers with great stories. You can call us what you want. You can call us a brand. You can call us a studio. Does it matter? I don't think it matters, as long as it's not, in your face we're not selling anything in our films. Appreciate the art, and And I think it's important for brands to fund this stuff. Funding's tough
Oh
for
yeah.
filmmaking, you know.
Yeah.
If we encourage brands to fund these projects, then that's important, you know. The platforms are the platforms, and there's not many of them, right? So the doc funding is tough.
No, I think like if you look at funding for documentaries in the United States, like a bulk of it comes from brands or foundations. And then if you look in Europe, like that's not the case at all. Like there's all these like government subsidies for the arts. And like we did a feature doc for another brand years ago, and we ended up showing it South by Southwest to premiere it, but like a lot of festivals wouldn't even show it because it was a branded feature. And I think that was in 2014. So a lot has changed since then, and it's become a lot more accepted, and there's a lot more brands funding beautiful work. But it does seem like the bulk of funding is brand related in the doc world.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see some of the awards and festivals start to create like a branded subset or a version. And I think, this year coming up in the streaming space, things are about to get really funky and fun. So we might find some more success leading with story and leading with good story, and not having, if you guys crack the code, please tell me and share. I think we're all in this together, kind of trying to figure that aspect out for sure. Looking outside Yeti, what advice would you give to other brands in this space, whether they're at the 85 plus film content maturation stage, or they're just trying to figure out how they create a story or find a story that will inspire brand love? What general advice would you give to our brand friends out there?
I would say definitely like quality over quantity. Like if you have limited resources, like don't spread it out and like try and do a bunch of mediocre creation. Like focus it and find like what resonates with you and your audience.
Anyone else have any advice?
I mean, Taylor should really answer. The thing I'm always in awe of with Taylor is her patience with how these films get made. To Scott, Scott was touching this earlier. This film took 100 different turns that many producers would have been like, hey, it's done, wrap it up. It's a great story, put it out there. And then we wouldn't have had the 4 other twists that happen in the film. So for me, it's patience. It's also like, when Scott's looking for films, it takes time. When him and Taylor are arguing over edits, it takes time to get to the right thing. So, but I'm always in awe of their patience to get it right. So I don't know. That's my advice to others.
That's great advice.
Patience seems to play off, because every time they come back to you with the latest edit, it's 100 times better than the one you saw before, which you thought was incredible. And
good stories don't always happen in a tidy calendar year or a fiscal year, as we tend to think of inside, the brand house. It can have it, like you said, for this film, you wouldn't have had all those twists and turns and all those that story develop in the way that it did if you were saying, I have to make this in 3 months and put out what I have at that time. I think we're about 45 minutes in. I'm literally losing light, so I'm so sorry. I did not anticipate East Coast cloudy weather, so I'm getting weird glow. But is there anything is there a question or anything you guys want to kind of closing thoughts from anyone as we wrap up the panel? Travis, what do we like to work with?
What's up?
Yeah.
What do we like to work with?
No pressure, Travis.
What's Bhutan Scott like?
I feel like I should just say nothing and nod in the background on this one.
A great interview. Thank you so much.
One thing I think we should shout out is Oliver, obviously, the kindest, most wonderful human being. And I don't know, Taylor and Scott, you've had a longer relationship with him than me, but every interaction, like, this guy is just a great a great pure human being, great family man. He's now got 2 kids,
Oh, wow.
and running an amazing lodge up in Idaho, as well as many things. So, but that is because of the relationship that Scott and Taylor and our community team have had over many years with Oliver, and to truly understand who he is and what makes him tick and all that stuff. So, thank you to Oliver for being him, and it's a great story of a great human being.
Yeah.
And for his trust in us to be able to tell a story, I think it takes a lot to time commitment and everything, all sorts of things, just to be able to open yourself up to having a film told about you. You know what I mean? And being that vulnerable and all those sorts of things. So
No, I think like the power of his vulnerability is strong, and like he is totally putting it out there, and I think the audience really reacts to that in a way that if he was like super macho and just like lived behind the beard, like it, like he could easily put up a facade that you wouldn't connect with at all, and he is just like super open, honest, and vulnerable in like this most beautiful way.
And that's a testament to obviously the relationship you guys have created with your talent, with your story development. Oliver said something, it's not a great way to close this panel, but he said something that stuck with me the first time I watched it, which was, the price you pay for loving something so much is the risk of losing it. And, Scott, you talked about universal themes, and just that hit so hard for me. And even just Travis, to your point of, and Taylor, to the point of telling stories that are literal life and death stories, and being able to go to that place and just share it with the world, and share it, in an intimate moment. That is the ultimate in storytelling. So kudos to this team for bringing that story to life. And I'm excited. I'd love to watch it all in a theater with you sometime soon. I think I'd love to see this in a theater. So I'm looking forward to that experience with all of you soon. And with that, thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
thanks,
everyone.
Kate.